Professor Kelvin walked into the large classroom and looked at his students. The room was shaped like a half circle with rows of seats going up toward the back. Students from many different planets sat waiting for class to begin. Some had scales, some had fur, and some looked like living crystals that caught the light. This was the Galactic Educational Station Harmony, a place where young beings from across the stars came to learn about each other. Today was going to be special. Kelvin had invited a guest to teach his class about predator species and how they raised their young. The students talked quietly among themselves. The Vexari students, whose bodies looked like colored glass, sat together on one side. The Mothall students, who looked like giant insects with many eyes, stayed near the back. The Planorians, gentle, plant eaters with soft fur and big eyes, kept to themselves in the middle rows. Everyone knew what today's lesson would be about, and many felt nervous. Kelvin checked the time on his device. The humans should arrive soon. He had read many reports about humans and their strange nature. They came from a death world, a planet, so dangerous that only the strongest creatures survived there. Humans were predators with sharp teeth and forward-facing eyes. They ate meat and had hunted other animals for thousands of years. But humans were also strange in other ways. They had built cities and made art. They wrote music and told stories. They cried when they were sad and laughed when they were happy. This confused many species in the galaxy. How could a predator species be so emotional and creative? The door opened with a soft sound. A tall human walked in carrying a large box with air holes in the sides. He had brown hair and wore simple clothes. When he smiled at the class, his teeth showed clearly. They were the teeth of a meat-eater, designed to tear and cut. Several students moved back in their seats. "Good morning, everyone," the human said. His voice was calm and friendly. "My name is Daniel Carter. I study how different species interact with each other. Today I want to show you something that most textbooks get wrong about predators." He set the box down carefully on the floor near the front of the room. Something inside made a small chirping sound. The Planorian students looked at each other with worry in their large eyes. Daniel turned on a screen that showed pictures of different animals. Many species think that predators are just killing machines. They think we only care about hunting and eating. But that's not true. Predator species can form bonds and friendships just like any other intelligent beings. A Vexari student named Shellix raised one crystalline arm. "But humans are dangerous. Your people come from a death world. How can we trust what you say about predators?" Daniel nodded. "That's a fair question. Yes. Earth is what you call a death world. We have storms that can destroy buildings. We have animals that can kill with one bite. Our planet tries to kill us in 100 different ways. But living there taught us something important. Being dangerous and being evil are not the same thing." He walked over to the box and knelt beside it. "Inside this container, I have 2 young Karathi. Does anyone know about the Karathi species?" A Mothall student clicked his mouth parts together. "The Karathi are apex predators. They are rated 8.7 on the aggression scale. They have killed many beings throughout history." "True," Daniel said. "Adult Karathi are very dangerous if you threaten them. But these are babies. They're learning about the world just like young beings from any species. And today, you're going to see how predator young can learn to be gentle." He opened the box slowly. 2 small creatures came out, walking on 6 legs each. They had dark fur with lighter stripes running along their bodies. Their eyes were bright and curious. When they yawned, everyone could see their mouths were full of sharp little teeth. Each one was about as big as a human's pet cat. The students in the front row pushed their seats back. Even Kelvin felt his heart beat faster. These were predators, even if they were small. Every instinct told prey species to run from creatures like this. But Daniel just sat down on the floor and held out his hand. "This is Luna," he said, pointing to one cub. "And this is Nova. They're about 3 months old. Watch what happens." The 2 cubs walked toward his hand slowly. They sniffed with their small noses, taking in his scent. Then Nova rubbed her head against his palm. Luna did the same thing. Both of them made a sound like purring, happy and content. "You see?" Daniel said softly. He scratched behind their ears, and their eyes closed with pleasure. They trust me. I've taken care of them since they were born. To them, I'm not prey. I'm not another predator. I'm family. The classroom was completely silent. Everyone stared at the scene in front of them. A human, a predator from a death world, was being gentle with two predator cubs. The cubs acted like they loved him. Daniel looked up at the students. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this only works because I'm also a predator. But that's not true. Luna and Nova have met many different species. They've played with Planorians and Vixari. They've met shy species and brave ones. In every case, if the meeting is done right, they're gentle and friendly. Shellick spoke again. But predators have instincts. They're programmed to hunt. How can you change millions of years of evolution? I'm not trying to change their evolution, Daniel explained. Luna and Nova are still predators. They still have hunting instincts. But they also have something else, something that all intelligent species have. They can learn. They can form relationships. They can choose how to act. He stood up slowly, and the cubs followed him. They stayed close to his legs, looking around at all the strange beings watching them. Nova made a small nervous sound. It's okay, girl, Daniel said, touching her head gently. These are friends. No one here will hurt you. Kelvin watched carefully. He had taught xenobiology for 15 years, but he had never seen anything like this. The textbook said that predator species should be kept separate from prey species, especially young predators who hadn't learned control yet. But here was a human, proving that the textbooks might be wrong. Daniel continued his lesson. The key to understanding predators is realizing that they're not so different from you. Yes, they eat meat. Yes, they have instincts to hunt. But they also feel fear and happiness. They form friendships. They care for their young. They're living beings with complex emotions. He picked up Nova gently and held her in his arms like a human baby. She curled up against his chest, completely relaxed. When Nova was born, she was tiny and helpless. Her mother had died, and she would have died too without help. I fed her every few hours. I kept her warm. I taught her how to play. She bonded with me because I showed her kindness. Luna climbed up Daniel's leg using her small claws. He shifted Nova to one arm and picked up Luna with the other. Now he held both cubs, and they looked completely peaceful. Every young creature needs love and care, Daniel said. It doesn't matter if they're predators or prey. It doesn't matter if they come from a safe world or a death world. All children need someone to protect them and teach them about life. That's what I've done for Luna and Nova. A Planorian student in the middle rows raised her hand slowly. Her whole body was shaking, but she spoke anyway. Can we ask them questions? The cubs, I mean? Daniel smiled. They can't speak your languages yet, but they can understand tone and emotion. If you speak gently, they'll know you're being friendly. Would you like to try? The Planorian student stood up on trembling legs. Hello, Luna and Nova, she said in a soft voice. My name is Mira. Both cubs turned to look at her. Their ears moved forward, listening. Nova made a small chirping sound in response. Mira's eyes went wide. She answered me. She did, Daniel confirmed. She's saying hello in her own way. Predators aren't mindless beasts. They communicate, and they understand more than most people think. Kelvin looked at his students and saw their fear beginning to change into curiosity. This was exactly what he had hoped for when he invited Daniel to speak. The galaxy needed to learn that predators and prey could coexist peacefully. Daniel set the cubs down on the floor again. They immediately started playing with each other, rolling around and play-fighting with gentle bites that wouldn't hurt anyone. The students watched, fascinated by how much the deadly predators looked like playful children. For the rest of this class, Daniel said, I'm going to teach you about predator development and social bonding, but more importantly, I'm going to challenge what you think you know about dangerous species. Because the most dangerous thing in the galaxy isn't predators or death worlds. It's fear based on ignorance. He looked around the room, making eye contact with students from every species. If we let our instincts control us, we'll never have peace. Prey species will always fear predators. Predators will always see prey as food. But if we use our intelligence, if we choose to learn and understand each other, we can build something better. Luna yawned and stretched, showing all her little teeth. Then she walked over to the edge of the platform and sat down, watching the students with curious eyes. Nova joined her sister, and together they looked like two ordinary young animals, not the fearsome predators their species was known to be. Kelvin stepped forward. Professor Carter will be with us for the next 2 hours. I encourage all of you to pay close attention. This lesson might change how you see the galaxy. Daniel had been talking for nearly 30 minutes about Karathi biology and behavior. He explained how their 6 legs helped them climb and hunt. He showed diagrams of their brain structure and how it was similar to other intelligent species. Luna and Nova sat quietly beside him, occasionally playing with each other but mostly just watching the class. The students were listening carefully now. Their initial fear had faded somewhat as they watched the cubs act more like curious children than dangerous predators. But everyone still kept their distance. No one wanted to get too close. A Mothall student named Trixon raised one of his many legs. Professor Carter, I have a question. You say these cubs can be friendly with any species, but you're also a predator. Maybe they're only gentle with you because they recognize you as one of their own kind. How do we know they won't attack a prey species? Daniel nodded slowly. That's a really good question, and you're right to think carefully about it. The truth is, the whole idea of predator and prey is more complicated than most people realize. Yes, biology matters. Yes, instincts are real. But intelligent beings can learn to override their instincts. He gestured to the cubs. Luna and Nova have met lots of different species. I've introduced them to Planorians, Vixari, Dendari, and many others. Every time, as long as the introduction was done carefully, they were friendly and gentle. They didn't see prey. They saw new friends. Trixon clicked his mouth parts together thoughtfully. But how can we know that's true? We only have your word for it. You're absolutely right, Daniel said. Words aren't enough. You need to see it for yourselves. So I'm going to ask for a volunteer. Would anyone here be willing to come down and meet Luna and Nova in person? The classroom went completely silent. Students looked at each other nervously. No one moved. No one raised their hand. The idea of getting close to predators, even small ones, was too frightening for most of them. Kelvin stepped forward. Perhaps we're moving too fast. The students came here to observe, not to put themselves at risk. I understand, Daniel said calmly. But there's no risk if it's done properly. Luna and Nova have been trained for this. They've met new beings dozens of times. I wouldn't ask anyone to do something dangerous, still no one volunteered. The Planorians looked especially worried. Their large eyes were wider than usual, and several of them had moved their seats as far back as they could go. Then a voice came from the middle of the classroom. I'll do it. Everyone turned to look. Mira, the young Planorian who had spoken to the cubs earlier, was standing up. Her hands were shaking and her legs looked unsteady, but her voice was firm. Mira, no. Another Planorian student whispered. It's too dangerous. Maybe, Mira said quietly. But Professor Carter is right. If we only learn from a distance, we'll never truly understand. We'll always be controlled by our fear. Kelvin looked worried. Mira, you don't have to do this. No one will think less of you if you change your mind. I know, she replied, but I want to. I need to. She looked at Daniel. What should I do? Daniel smiled with genuine respect. Come down slowly. Move calmly and steadily. No quick movements or sudden sounds. Not because the cubs are dangerous, but because we want them to feel comfortable with you. Mira walked down the steps carefully. Every student in the classroom watched her. Some looked amazed at her courage. Others looked certain she was making a terrible mistake. The Planorians seemed frozen with fear for their friend. As Mira got closer to the front of the room, Luna and Nova stopped playing. They sat up straight and watched her approach. Their eyes tracked every step she took. Those were predator eyes designed to follow moving prey. It was their nature, programmed into them by millions of years of evolution. Mira saw those eyes watching her and almost stopped walking. Every part of her body screamed at her to run. Her species had survived for generations by running from predators. Fleeing was in her blood, in her bones, in every cell of her body, but she kept walking. When she reached the platform, Daniel guided her gently. Kneel down slowly. Get to their level, and remember, they can sense your emotions. Try to stay calm. That's hard, Mira whispered. Her whole body was shaking now. I know, Daniel said softly. You're doing great. Just breathe. Mira knelt down about 3 feet away from the cubs. Luna and Nova watched her with intense interest. Nova's nose twitched as she smelled this new being. Luna tilted her head to one side, studying Mira carefully. "Hold out your hand," Daniel instructed. "Let them come to you. Don't reach for them." Mira extended her trembling hand. She had to force herself to keep it steady. Every instinct told her to pull back, to protect herself, to run away as fast as she could. Nova stood up and took a step forward. Then another. She was moving slowly, carefully, as if she understood that Mira was frightened. The cub's nose was working hard, taking in all the new scents. The classroom was so quiet that everyone could hear Mira's rapid breathing. Students leaned forward in their seats, watching what would happen next. Nova reached Mira's hand and sniffed it carefully. The cub's whiskers tickled Mira's palm. Then very gently, Nova pressed her small head against Mira's hand and made a soft chirping sound. Mira gasped. "Oh, she likes you," Daniel said quietly. She sang hello. Luna decided she wanted to meet Mira too. The second cub walked over and rubbed against Mira's arm, purring softly. Both cubs were being incredibly gentle, as if they knew this person needed them to be careful. Tears started running down Mira's face. "They're so soft," she whispered. "I never imagined predators could be soft." "Touch them if you want," Daniel encouraged. "Pet their fur gently." Mira carefully stroked Nova's back. The cub's fur was thick and warm. Nova's purring got louder, a sound of complete contentment. Luna pushed her head under Mira's other hand, wanting attention too. "I can't believe this," Mira said through her tears. "My whole life I've been taught to fear predators. My parents told me stories about creatures with sharp teeth and claws. I had nightmares about being hunted, and now I'm sitting here touching them and they're just babies. They're just children who want to be petted and loved." The students watching began to whisper among themselves. They had seen something impossible. A planorian, a species bred for fleeing from danger, was calmly petting two predator cubs. And the cubs were treating her with gentleness and affection. Daniel spoke to the whole class. "This is what I wanted you to see. Yes, Luna and Nova are predators. Yes, they have instincts to hunt. But they're also intelligent beings capable of learning and forming bonds. They don't see Mira as food. They see her as a friend because that's what I've taught them." Shellix, the Vixari student, stood up. His crystalline body was flashing with colors that showed he was thinking hard. "May I try as well?" "Of course," Daniel said. Shellix came down to the platform. The cubs looked up at him with interest. Vixari were very different from planorians or humans. They were made of living crystal and didn't have fur or skin. But Luna and Nova didn't seem to care about the difference. When Shellix held out his hand, they greeted him the same way they had greeted Mira. "Fascinating," Shellix said as Nova rubbed against his crystalline arm. "Their behavior is completely non-aggressive. They show no signs of hunting instinct at all." "They still have those instincts," Daniel corrected. "But right now they're in social mode, not hunting mode. They know this is a time for making friends, not catching food. That's the beauty of intelligent predators. They can switch between different behaviors based on the situation." More students began to volunteer. A mothall student carefully approached and let the cubs sniff his strange insect-like body. A dendari, one of the shyest species in the galaxy, came down and was surprised when Luna gently licked his tentacle. Each interaction was a small miracle. Each time a prey species touched a predator without being hurt, it challenged everything they had been taught about how the universe worked. Kelvin watched with amazement. In all his years of teaching, he had never seen anything like this. His curriculum taught that different species should be kept separate, that prey and predator could never truly coexist. But Daniel was proving that wrong right in front of him. After about an hour, Daniel called for a break. The cubs were getting tired from all the attention, and the students needed time to process what they had experienced. Mira stayed near the front of the room. She was sitting on the floor with Nova curled up in her lap and Luna resting against her side. The fear she had felt earlier was completely gone. Now she just looked peaceful and happy. "How do you feel?" Daniel asked her. "Different," Mira said softly. "I feel like everything I knew about the universe just changed. If predators can be gentle, if prey can be brave, then maybe nothing is as simple as I thought it was." "That's wisdom," Daniel said. "Real learning happens when we challenge our assumptions." "You were brave today, Mira, braver than you know." "I was terrified," she admitted. "I know. But you did it anyway. That's what courage really is." Nova stretched in Mira's lap and yawned, showing all her little teeth. Mira laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Even her teeth are cute," she said. Shellix approached them. Mira, I must admit I thought you were being foolish when you volunteered. I was certain you would be hurt. I'm glad I was wrong. So am I, Mira said with a smile. Other students began gathering around, asking questions about what it felt like to touch the lecture had been going wonderfully for almost 2 hours. Daniel was in the middle of explaining how young predators learned social behaviors when the alarm suddenly started blaring through the station. The sound was loud and harsh, designed to cut through any noise and get immediate attention. Red lights began flashing along the walls of the classroom. A computerized voice spoke urgently over the speakers. Warning: environmental system failure in Section 7 Delta. Atmospheric processors experiencing critical malfunction. All personnel must evacuate affected areas immediately. This is not a drill. The comfortable temperature in the classroom started changing instantly. Within seconds, it became noticeably warmer. The air felt thick and hard to breathe. The lights flickered and then switched to emergency mode, bathing everything in a red glow that made the room look dangerous and unfamiliar. The effect on the students was immediate and powerful. The Planorians responded to the alarm on pure instinct. Their species had survived for millions of years by running from danger, and that's exactly what they did now. Several of them jumped from their seats and bolted for the exits, their large eyes wide with panic. The Vixari students began flashing rapidly, their crystalline bodies showing bright colors that signaled extreme distress. The Mothall took flight, their wings buzzing loudly as they circled the room in confusion. Everyone was scared, and that fear spread through the classroom like wildfire, and the Karathi cubs felt it all. Luna and Nova had been playing quietly in the corner, tired from meeting so many new beings. But when the alarm sounded and the students started panicking, everything changed. The cubs' playful behavior vanished in an instant. Their bodies went rigid. Their pupils expanded until their eyes looked almost completely black. Their ears flattened against their heads. Low growls came from their throats, sounds that sent waves of primal terror through every prey species in the room. These were no longer cute, friendly cubs. These were predators, and their hunting instincts had just been triggered by the chaos around them. Nova crouched low to the ground, her muscles tensing. Her eyes locked onto a Planorian student who was running toward the door. Everything about her posture screamed that she was about to pounce, to chase, to hunt. Luna bared her teeth fully, showing all her sharp fangs. She was watching a group of Vixari who were flashing in panic. The movement and the fear scent in the air were triggering every predator instinct she had. A Planorian student screamed. That sound made everything worse. Both cubs' heads snapped toward the source of the noise. Their bodies coiled tighter, ready to spring. Everyone stop! Kelvin shouted, but his voice was lost in the chaos. Students were pushing toward the exits, some were crying, and the alarm kept blaring its urgent warning. This was every safety instructor's worst nightmare. Predators with their instincts fully activated in a confined space with panicking prey species. It was a disaster waiting to happen. Daniel saw it all unfolding in seconds. He saw Nova's haunches bunch for a jump. He saw Luna's claws extend, digging into the floor for traction. He saw the terror in the student's eyes and knew that if the cubs attacked even in play or confusion, it would undo everything he had worked for. It would prove that predators couldn't be trusted. He moved faster than anyone watching would have thought possible. Daniel dropped to his knees between the cubs and the panicking students. He didn't run. He didn't shout. Instead, he made himself a barrier, putting his own body between potential danger and the frightened students. Luna, Nova, here, now. His voice cut through the noise, calm but filled with authority. It was the voice of a pack leader, a parent, someone who demanded attention and respect. Both cubs froze. Their eyes were still wild, their bodies still tense, but they heard him. Through all the chaos and fear and instinct, they recognized that voice. "Look at me," Daniel said, keeping his voice steady. "Not them. Me. Eyes on me, girls." Nova's head turned slightly toward him. She was still crouched, still ready to chase the running prey, but part of her attention had shifted to Daniel. Luna was harder to reach. Her focus remained locked on the Vixari students, her predator brain tracking their panicked movements. A low snarl came from her throat. The temperature kept rising. Sweat was forming on Daniel's forehead, on his arms. The environmental failure was getting worse. Students were crying and pushing toward the exits. Everything was chaos, but Daniel never took his eyes off Luna. I know you're scared, he said softly. I know all this noise and heat and running is confusing. Your instincts are telling you to chase, to hunt, to protect yourself. But you know better. You know me. I'm here. You're safe. He slowly extended both his hands toward them, palms up. It was a gesture of openness, of welcome. He wasn't threatening them or trying to grab them. He was inviting them to come to him, to choose trust over instinct. You're good girls, he continued, his voice somehow calm despite the chaos. You're smart and brave, and you can control this. Come here, come to me. Let me help you. Nova took one small step toward him, then another. Her body was still tense, her eyes still too wide, but she was responding to his voice. Luna remained frozen, torn between her predator instincts and her bond with Daniel. Her whole body was shaking with the internal struggle. Kelvin had stopped trying to control the crowd. Instead, he was quietly helping students move toward the exits, keeping them calm, preventing the panic from getting worse. He glanced at Daniel and saw what the human was attempting to do. Move slowly, Kelvin called to the remaining students. No running, no sudden movements. Head to the exits calmly. His instructions helped. The panic began to ease slightly. Students still left quickly, but they weren't screaming and running anymore. The reduction in chaos made a difference. Daniel saw Luna's focus waver. The prey wasn't running as frantically now. The overwhelming stimulus that had triggered her hunting instinct was decreasing. That's it, Daniel said gently. See, everything's calming down. You don't need to be scared. You don't need to hunt. You just need to come here to me where it's safe. Nova reached him first. She pressed against his side, still trembling but no longer in hunting mode. Her growls had changed to small whimpers, sounds of confusion and fear rather than aggression. Daniel carefully wrapped one arm around her. Good girl. Such a good, brave girl. I've got you. Luna watched her sister find safety with Daniel. That seemed to make the decision for her. With a small cry, she broke from her crouch and ran to him, pressing against his other side. Daniel pulled both cubs close, letting them feel his heartbeat, his warmth, his presence. You're okay. We're all okay. I'm so proud of you both. You heard me through all that fear. You chose to trust me. The cubs buried their faces against him, their earlier aggression completely gone. Now they were just frightened children seeking comfort from a parent. The alarm finally stopped. The silence that followed was almost as shocking as the noise had been. The emergency lighting remained on, but the temperature began to stabilize. The environmental systems were coming back online. Most of the students had evacuated, but a few remained near the exits, watching what was happening with wide eyes. They had seen how close things had come to disaster. They had seen the cubs transform from friendly to deadly in seconds, but they had also seen something else. They had seen Daniel bring the cubs back from that edge. They had seen trust overcome instinct. Mira was one of the students who had stayed. She stood near the door, her body still shaking from fear. But slowly, carefully, she walked back down toward the platform. Mira, no, another Planorian called to her. It's too dangerous. You saw what they almost did. I saw what they didn't do, Mira replied quietly. She kept walking until she reached Daniel and the cubs. Luna and Nova looked up at her approach. Their eyes were calmer now, but they were still scared and confused. Can I help? Mira asked Daniel softly. Daniel looked at her with deep respect. Minutes ago, she had been running for her life. Now she was offering comfort to the same predators who had nearly hunted her. That took courage most beings couldn't imagine. Talk to them, Daniel said. Let them hear a calm, friendly voice. It will help them settle down. Mira knelt down beside them. She began speaking in her own language, a series of musical sounds that meant nothing to the cubs linguistically, but everything emotionally. The tone was soothing, gentle, caring. Luna's ears slowly came up from their flattened position. Nova's trembling began to ease. They responded to Mira's kindness even though moments before she had been potential prey. The emergency lights finally switched back to normal. The room looked familiar again instead of strange and threatening. The temperature returned to a comfortable level. Kelvin approached slowly. Is everyone all right? We're fine, Daniel said. Scared but fine. That was too close, Kelvin said, his voice shaking slightly. When I saw them crouch like that, ready to attack, I thought we were about to witness a tragedy. But we didn't, Daniel pointed out. Yes, their instincts kicked in. Yes, they almost lost control, but they didn't. They heard me and they chose to trust me over their own biology. That's the whole point. Instincts are strong, but they're not absolute. Nova made a small sound and licked Mira's hand. The Planorian smiled through her tears. They were so frightened, Mira said. When I heard them growl, I was terrified. But now I understand. They weren't tra. The classroom had been completely evacuated except for Daniel, Kelvin, Mira, and the two cubs. The station's maintenance crew had sent a message saying they needed to check all the systems before allowing students back into the section. It would take at least an hour, maybe more. Daniel sat on the floor with his back against the lecture platform. Luna was pressed against his left side and Nova against his right. Both cubs were calm now, but they stayed very close to him. Every few minutes, one of them would make a small worried sound and push harder against his body. I should get them back to their habitat, Daniel said. He looked at the transport container sitting near the wall where he had left it hours ago. They need to rest somewhere quiet after all that stress. Mira was sitting cross-legged nearby, watching the cubs with concern. I don't think they want to go in the box right now. She was right. When Daniel started to stand up, both Luna and Nova made distressed chirping sounds and clung to him. Nova put her small paws on his leg, looking up at him with wide, frightened eyes. It's okay, Daniel said gently, sitting back down. I'm not going anywhere. But when he tried again a few minutes later, guiding the cubs toward the container, they absolutely refused to move. Luna planted all 6 of her feet firmly on the floor and wouldn't budge. Nova started making a high-pitched whining sound that clearly meant no. Daniel sighed and ran his hand through his hair. They associate the container with being closed in. After what just happened with the alarm and the heat, they don't want to feel trapped again. Kelvin checked his schedule on his tablet. Well, the next class isn't for 3 hours. I suppose there's no harm in staying here a while longer if it helps them feel safer. Are you sure? Daniel asked. I don't want to cause problems. After what I witnessed today, I think traditional scheduling is the least of my concerns, Kelvin replied. He sat down in one of the student seats looking thoughtful. Besides, I'm curious to see how they recover from a stressful event. That's valuable information in itself. Mira spoke up softly. I can stay too if you don't mind. I'd like to help if I can. I'd appreciate that, Daniel said with a grateful smile. They seem to trust you. So the 4 of them settled in along with the 2 cubs. It was quiet except for the soft humming of the station's systems returning to normal operation. After the chaos of the alarm and evacuation, the silence felt peaceful. Nova rested her head on Daniel's leg and closed her eyes. But she didn't sleep. Every few seconds, her ears would twitch, listening for any sound that might signal more danger. Luna was even more alert. She kept watching the door, her body tense, ready to react if anything threatening came through. Mira watched them with sadness in her eyes. They're still so scared, she observed. They are, Daniel agreed. What happened triggered something deep in their brains. The alarm, the heat, the panic, all of it told them they were in danger. It's going to take time for them to feel completely safe again. How long? Kelvin asked. Could be minutes, could be hours. Every animal is different. Luna seems more anxious than Nova right now. She's the one who had the hardest time coming back to me during the alarm. As if she heard her name and understood they were talking about her, Luna turned to look at Daniel. Her eyes were still worried, still watching for threats. Come here, sweetheart, Daniel said, patting the space beside him. You don't have to watch the door. Nothing's going to hurt you. Luna hesitated, then slowly moved closer until she was tucked against Daniel's side, but her eyes kept darting toward the door. They sat in silence for a while. Gradually, the cubs began to relax more. Their breathing slowed. Their muscles loosened. The immediate fear was fading, replaced by tiredness. Mira moved a little closer, careful not to startle them. Can I ask you something personal, Professor Carter? Call me Daniel. And yes, of course, why do you do this work? It must be hard sometimes. And after what happened today, you could have been hurt. The cubs could have hurt someone. Why take that risk? Daniel was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to answer. I grew up on Earth in a place that had a lot of wild animals. My family helped injured animals get better so they could go back to nature. I spent my whole childhood around creatures that other people thought were dangerous. He gently stroked Nova's fur, and she made a content sound. I learned that most animals aren't mean or evil. They're just trying to survive. A bear that attacks someone isn't being cruel. She's protecting her babies. A wolf that growls isn't being aggressive for fun. He's scared or defending his territory. But those are just animals, Kelvin said. The Karathi are intelligent. They can think and plan. True, Daniel agreed, but that makes it even more important to understand them. If they were just mindless beasts, then yes, maybe keeping them away from everyone would make sense. But they're smart. They have feelings. They can learn and grow. Treating them like monsters just because they're predators seems wrong to me. Mira nodded slowly. When humans first joined the galactic community, many species were afraid of your people. I've read about it in history class. They saw your teeth and your forward-facing eyes and labeled you as dangerous deathworlders. They did, Daniel confirmed. And you know what? They weren't completely wrong. Humans can be dangerous. We come from a planet that tried to kill us every day. We evolved to hunt, to fight, to survive against terrible odds. But we're also so much more than that. He looked at both Kelvin and Mira. We create art and music. We tell stories. We form friendships with beings completely different from ourselves. We care about fairness and justice. We're predators, yes, but we're not defined by that alone. And you think the same is true for the Karathi? Kelvin asked. I know it is. I've studied their culture, their history. They've fought wars, yes. They've hunted prey species. But they've also built beautiful cities. They've written poetry. They've formed alliances with other species and kept their word. They're complex beings just like humans, just like Planorians and Vexari and everyone else. Nova suddenly stirred and did something unexpected. She got up from Daniel's side and walked slowly over to Mira. The Planorian froze, uncertain what to do. Nova sat down in front of Mira and looked up at her with those big predator eyes. Then very deliberately she climbed into Mira's lap and curled up into a tight ball. Mira's breath caught in her throat. Oh, she whispered. She's choosing to be close to you, Daniel said softly. After everything that happened, after being so scared, she's choosing to trust you. Tears started running down Mira's face again. She carefully placed her hands on Nova's back, feeling the cub's warmth, her soft fur, her steady breathing. I was so terrified earlier, Mira admitted, when she crouched down like she was going to hunt. When I heard that growl, every part of me wanted to run. My species has spent millions of years running from sounds like that. But you came back anyway, Daniel pointed out. After the danger passed, you chose to come back and help. That's incredibly brave. I don't feel brave. I feel like I'm still shaking inside. Bravery isn't the absence of fear, Daniel said. It's doing what's right even when you're afraid. You did that today, twice. Once when you volunteered to meet the cubs, and again when you came back after the alarm. Luna, seeing her sister comfortable with Mira, seemed to decide she wanted to join them. She got up and walked over to the Planorian, then curled up beside Nova in Mira's lap. Now Mira had both cubs with her, two small predators, each with the potential to be deadly when fully grown, choosing to sleep peacefully with a being their instincts said should be prey. I wish I could take a picture of this, Kelvin said quietly. If I told other professors what I'm seeing, they'd never believe me. Take one, Daniel said. He pulled out his communication device and handed it to Kelvin. The whole galaxy should see this. Kelvin took several photos. The images showed Mira sitting with tears on her face, smiling down at the two sleeping cubs in her lap. It was a picture of trust, of connection, of barriers being broken. What will you do with these? Kelvin asked, handing the device back. I don't know yet, Daniel said. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Images like this can change minds, but they can also be misunderstood. Some people will see proof that predators and prey can coexist. Others will say we're being foolish and putting ourselves in danger. But we're not in danger right now, Mira said softly, looking down at the cubs. Right now, we're just beings taking care of each other. They sat in comfortable silence. The station hummed around them, life continuing normally in other sections. But here in this quiet classroom, something special was happening. Nova made small sleep sounds, her paws twitching as she dreamed. Luna's tail wrapped around Mira's arm, holding on even in sleep. These were the gestures of children who felt safe and loved. Daniel watched them and felt a deep sense of peace. This was why he did this work. Not for fame or recognition, but for moments like this. Moments where fear transformed into trust. Moments where beings from completely different worlds found common ground. Can I tell you something? Mira said after a long silence. My grandmother used to tell me stories when I was little. Scary stories about the great predators that hunted our ancestors. She said we survived because we were fast and smart and always careful. She said predators only knew how to take life, never to give comfort or love. 3 months had passed since the day of the environmental alarm. Word about what happened in Professor Kelvin's classroom had spread across the entire station. Students talked about it in hallways. Professors discussed it in faculty meetings. The story of a human, a Planorian, and 2 predator cubs had become something of a legend. The official incident report praised Daniel for his handling of a dangerous situation. But the students who had been there told a different story entirely. They didn't talk about danger managed. They talked about trust demonstrated. They talked about watching impossible friendships form right in front of their eyes. Daniel stood in the same classroom where it all happened. But things looked very different now. The room had been completely reconfigured. Instead of the traditional rows of seats all facing forward, there were now multiple areas designed for different species. Planorians had soft cushioned spaces. Vexari had platforms that let light shine through their crystalline bodies. Mothal had perches near the ceiling. Every species had a place where they could be comfortable. The room wasn't just a classroom anymore. It was a gathering space, a place designed specifically for beings from different worlds to meet and interact safely. Mira stood beside Daniel at the front of the room. After everything that happened, she had changed her entire course of study. She was no longer studying traditional Planorian literature and history. Now she was focused on cross-species psychology and predator biology. Her professors had been shocked, but her family had been even more surprised. My mother cried when I told her Mira had confided to Daniel weeks ago, not from sadness but from fear. She begged me to choose something safer, but I told her about Luna and Nova. I showed her the pictures. She didn't understand, but she supported me anyway. Today was the first session of a completely new course called Cross-Species Integration. Daniel had proposed it to the faculty, and after much debate they had approved a trial program. If it went well, it might become a permanent part of the station's curriculum. The classroom was filling up with students from dozens of different species. Some looked excited, some looked nervous. A few looked openly skeptical, like they were here just to prove the whole thing was a bad idea. Luna and Nova were there too, but they had changed dramatically in 3 months. They were now 6 months old and significantly larger. Each cub was about the size of a medium Earth dog. They wore bright-colored identification harnesses that marked them as trained socialization animals, the first Karathi to ever receive such certification. The cubs sat calmly beside Daniel, watching the students arrive. They had done this enough times now that they knew the routine. Their eyes were alert but not aggressive. They were curious but not frightened. A Dendari student near the back raised one of his tentacles nervously. "Professor Carter, is it true that we'll be expected to physically touch predator species during this course?" Daniel smiled patiently. He had answered this question in the course description, in emails, and during the registration period. But he understood the fear behind it. Every interaction in this course is completely voluntary. No one will be forced to do anything they're uncomfortable with. The goal is to expand your understanding and comfort level at your own pace. He gestured to Luna and Nova. These cubs have been specifically trained for this work. They've met hundreds of different beings over the past 3 months. They understand that this is a learning space, not a hunting ground. But I won't lie to you. They're still predators. They still have instincts. What we're learning here is how intelligence and choice can guide behavior beyond pure instinct. A Vexari student whose name was Toril spoke up. His crystalline body was flashing amber, which indicated uncertainty. "But Professor, isn't it risky to base an entire course on the idea that predators can overcome their nature? What happened 3 months ago proves that in stressful situations, instinct takes over." "That's a fair point," Daniel acknowledged. "And you're right. During the environmental alarm, Luna and Nova's hunting instincts did activate. They were seconds away from chasing fleeing prey. But they didn't. They heard me through their fear and chose to trust me instead of following their instincts. That's the lesson. Not that instincts don't exist, but that they can be managed and guided." Mira stepped forward to speak. When she did, several Planorian students in the room sat up straighter. Seeing one of their own kind working alongside a human with predator cubs was powerful. "I was terrified that day," Mira said honestly. "When I heard Luna and Nova growl, when I saw them crouch to hunt, every part of me wanted to run. My body was screaming at me that I was about to die. But I'm standing here today, alive and unharmed. More than that, I've spent the last 3 months working closely with these cubs. I've fed them, played with them, even cleaned up after them. She smiled. They're not monsters. They're children learning about a complex galaxy. And if a Planorian, a species that evolved to flee from predators, can work safely with them, then anyone can learn to move beyond their evolutionary programming. A young Planorian in the front row raised her hand shyly. Mira, did your family try to stop you from doing this? Yes, Mira answered simply. My mother, my father, even my younger siblings all thought I was making a terrible mistake. They thought I'd been brainwashed or traumatized. But over time, as I sent them pictures and messages, as they saw I was safe and happy, they started to understand. My mother still worries every day, but she's proud of me too. Nova stood up and walked over to Mira, sitting beside her. The cub's tail wagged slowly and she leaned against Mira's leg. The gesture was casual, comfortable, showing how normal this relationship had become for them. Several students gasped. Even after 3 months of hearing stories, seeing a prey species standing calmly with a predator was still startling for many. Daniel continued. Today's session is going to be simple. We're going to talk about biological instincts versus learned behavior. We're going to discuss how different species communicate. And for those who want to, we'll have supervised introductions with Luna and Nova, but first, I want to be completely honest with you about what this course is and isn't. He walked to the center of the room so everyone could see him clearly. This course won't eliminate the biological differences between predators and prey. Luna and Nova will always be carnivores. They'll always have hunting instincts. Planorians will always have flight responses. Vexari will always react to sudden movements. These things are coded into our genetics. But, he continued, intelligence gives us choices that pure animals don't have. I'm a human, a predator species from a death world. Everything about my biology says I should see Planorians as prey. But I don't. I see them as colleagues, as friends, as equals. That's the power of conscious choice over instinct. Luna got up and walked into the middle of the classroom. Several students leaned back nervously. But Luna just sat down and looked around with curious eyes. She was completely calm, not showing any signs of aggression. Watch her body language, Daniel instructed. Her ears are up and forward, which means she's interested and alert but not threatened. Her tail is still, not lashing. Her mouth is closed, not showing teeth. These are all signs of a relaxed predator. Learning to read these signals helps you understand what she's feeling. A Mothall student named Vectar buzzed his wings thoughtfully. So you're saying that communication can cross species barriers? Exactly, Daniel said. Every species communicates differently. Humans use words and facial expressions. Planorians use tone and color changes in their fur. Vexari use light patterns. Karathi use body language and vocal sounds. But emotions like fear, happiness, curiosity, these are universal. If you learn to read the signs, you can understand what any being is feeling. Nova joined her sister in the middle of the room. The two cubs touched noses briefly, then sat side by side watching the students. Now I'm going to ask for volunteers, Daniel said. Who would like to meet Luna and Nova up close? For a long moment, no one moved. Then Mira spoke up. I'll go first, again. She walked over to the cubs and knelt down between them. Both Luna and Nova immediately pressed against her, making happy chirping sounds. Mira laughed and petted them both. See how they respond to her? Daniel pointed out. They remember her. They trust her, even though they could easily hurt her if they wanted to. They choose gentleness instead. That's learned behavior overriding instinct. A Vexari student stood up hesitantly. May I try? Of course, Daniel said. Come down slowly. Let them see you approaching. And remember, if you feel uncomfortable at any point, just step back. There's no shame in recognizing your limits. The Vexari student, who introduced herself as Linra, came down to the front. She was flashing pale blue, which showed nervousness. Luna and Nova watched her approach with interest. Hold out your hand, Mira coached gently. Let them sniff you first. Linra extended her crystalline hand. Nova sniffed it carefully, her whiskers tickling the smooth surface. Then she rubbed her head against it affectionately. Oh, Linra exclaimed. She's warm. I didn't expect that. Karathi are warm-blooded, Daniel explained. Their body temperature is actually slightly higher than humans. Luna wanted attention too. She nudged Linra's other hand with her nose. When the Vexari student petted her, Luna's purring rumbled through the quiet.